Yeah. So the 90s were a period of like desperate survival for everyone, right? So for the Iraqi people, they are facing unemployment, they are facing potential hunger or even starvation. They are facing, all of their life savings becoming worthless because the currency, right? So like desperate survival. And the government is also in this position of like facing kind of desperate circumstances as well. Not to be sympathetic to them, but just to understand like where they're coming from. So, the sanctions are ruining the Iraqi economy, which threatens, the whole point of these sanctions actually really is to weaken and eventually end Saddam Hussein's regime. That's like the whole point. That's why the UN, with the strong support of the US, is pushing this policy. So the government knows like its existence is under threat. It no longer has a lot of resources. There was the uprising in 1991, the Intifada, where like almost the entire country is rising up in anger against the government. People who were Ba'ath Party members are being attacked. So like the whole ruling apparatus, like they don't like they're under threat. And then the Baghdad was horribly bombed in 91, and the US continues to bomb Iraq periodically, right? For example, in 1998. Um, so the government um, introduces food rationing very, very early on, right? So the sanctions policy is announced in August of 1990. By October 1990, the government is already doing emergency food distribution. And by January 1991, it is like a well worked out system. So the government is doing this for a few reasons. Like, on the one hand, if the Iraqi people are actually literally starving, there will be riots. And so in the government's own self-interest, they need to feed the people so that people don't continue to rise up against them, which like they did, right? Like they had, right? So like that's a very real threat. So they are providing it. That's also a form though of control, right? It's helping ensure their political survival by helping to ensure kind of bare minimum food is reaching everyone for Iraqi survival. But then, right, as the government is providing this food, Iraqis of all backgrounds are using it, right? So the poorest Iraqis, this is all they're eating. But even for middle class Iraqis and even upper class Iraqis, people are not going to turn away free food, right? They're using it. Sometimes they sell it to get other things they need. Sometimes they eat it, but then they have a little money to supplement it with maybe fresh fruit or vegetables or something. But everyone is using it. And so that gives the government a lot of power and a lot of leverage, because then what Saddam does is he threatens to cut off people's rations if they are not obeying. And I mentioned that there are two groups in particular that really get targeted. And the first group are soldiers who desert from the army, and the second group are government employees. And both groups, if you think about it, are like the populations that if the government can control anyone, they should be able to control their soldiers and their employees. And so it's crucial for Saddam to actually run a country, right? He needs actual bureaucrats to show up to work. He needs his soldiers to be like ready to defend the country, but he also needs to be able to show that he's still in control. And it looks really bad if you can't get teachers to show up to school. But of course, that is a massive problem because people's paychecks are worth nothing. So there's something like 12,000 teachers who stop going to school. And as a result, like literacy rates really suffer in Iraq too. So anyway, so the government is using food both to help ensure its survival and try to help make the population kind of able to survive, but also kind of happier with the regime, but then threatening to cut it off to keep people in line.
Yeah. So, in the Soviet Union, when punishments were there, it was really because of the economic impact of people not going and working in factories, and you know, the economic impact of not having workers. But in Saddam's era, it's all about the image. And from the way I see it, the way I see chapter three, is that it's sectioned into two parts. Which, first of all, this rationing system had empowered local representatives in the Ba'ath Party to use these rations in order to have to control relationships, to control even the money that they get, because at some point I believe that the rations were assigned to someone in the neighborhood, and that someone also got corrupted by selling them in the black markets and all of that, you know. So this is there's a system side of it, and also there's like the side where people were tortured, really tortured, and some horrible stories were mentioned in your chapter about um, fathers begging to get the rations back, for mothers like disowning their own sons for doing a bad thing, because there's the generational punishment that Saddam had, much like this, much like North Korea, right? So it's not just you; it's your family who get punished. But then
Right.
when there's like a reward, it's only you. So it's not very fair, right? Um,
That's right.
so this like this two parts, which I feel like it was with the petition part, which we're gonna get into, is like the heaviest things that the Saddam did, and when I think of it, I never like imagined, I never like thought of Saddam's era as this two controlling things. I've heard another story, but like it's very revealing and very eye-opening to me, right? So how do you think that impacted Iraqis?
Yeah. I think you're right in that when we think about like brutal dictatorships, sometimes we think about the individuals who were targeted and the horrific experiences people had in prisons, right? Like, or political prisoners. But with rations, what happened here was that the government gained control over everyone, right? And you didn't have to be politically active. You didn't have to belong to like an underground opposition group because everyone needs to eat, right? Like, so the government is like, I guess how I would think about it is like in the 60s and 70s, people could try to be like non-political. They're just going to go to work, go to school, keep their head down. They don't have to care as much about politics. In the 80s, with conscription, more and more people have to participate. But by the time you get to food rationing in the 90s, it's 100% of the population is now has to interact with the government and there's no avoiding it anymore. And
Even the
so it's
migrants. So it was a way
everyone, yeah, even
for them. Yeah,
foreigners, yeah, like the
yeah.
Egyptians who are in Iraq, like
It was a way of
everyone has rations, the
controlling,
children.
knowing who was entering and who was like, yeah.
Yeah, so the rations card, just that, like not even the food part, not even the threat, but just having every single person in the country register in their neighborhoods. And then you have to check their address every time they come in to pick up their food rations. It's a huge, like, intelligence operation, right? And the government now gets to monitor everyone. And you mentioned, yeah, these like neighborhood officials, you get the rations agents who, by the way, are just the grocery store owners, right? Like they are the people who had the small markets, the small shops in a neighborhood. Suddenly the government says, you're going to be the one to distribute rations. So they know the people in the neighborhood already. Because one thing people would try to do is if you on your rations card, maybe you pretend you have 5 children instead of 3, because then you'll get more rations. Or maybe, you know, someone in your family passes away. Maybe you try to keep that a secret so that their name stays on the ration card. It's harder to do that when the people in charge of checking the names and addresses are actually your neighbors. Right. And so the government is like kind of turning as many people into informants as they can. And the food rations just provides all sorts of new opportunities for the government to gain that kind of surveillance capabilities over the people. And then, yeah, because as you mentioned, they used collective punishment. So if your brother was a police officer and stopped showing up to work because his paycheck was worthless, well, it's not just your brother who's now in trouble. It's every single member of the family on your rations card, which could be up to 20 people, right? So maybe your grandma lives with you. Maybe you have like your sister's husband died and she's a widow and now she lives back with your family. I mean, you could have all sorts of people on your rations card, and every single one of them will now face hunger. And so it was absolutely designed to turn family members against each other. Because if you didn't turn in your family member and you knew where they were and you knew it was happening, well, now the punishment's even worse. And so people were just in terrible situations where there was no good option. And this is the chapter that just broke my heart the most. I mean, just some of these letters and some of the situations that families found themselves in, like you mentioned, the father and his son, you can see how much people love their family and yet are sort of forced into terrible choices of, do you let your whole family suffer, or do you turn over the one that the government wants? Or do you all try to escape and leave everything? I mean, like, none of these choices are good. None of these choices are easy. And that's what this policy did to people.